In a fair and ethical world, not the world the current Supreme Court lives in, each Supreme Court justice appointed by Donald Trump would recuse from a case involving Donald Trump, and Clarence Thomas would recuse from a case involving Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the presidential election because Clarence Thomas's wife eagerly participated in and cheered on Donald Trump's attempt to do that. But integrity does not seem to be Justice Thomas's thing.
Justice Thomas failed to report a loan that was no longer being collected with a big balance still due and hence was, as a practical matter, forgiven. He likely violated these requirements. If he failed to file his taxes accordingly, he also likely violated our tax laws.
Senator Whitehouse has asked the Judicial Conference to investigate whether Clarence Thomas' violation may have been willful, which would require the conference to report Clarence Thomas to the Attorney General for further investigation. In 2022, the New York Times and ProPublica reported that a Republican billionaire donated ownership of his $1.6 billion company to a nonprofit political organization run by Leonard Leo, among the largest contributions ever made to a political advocacy group, if not the very largest. Through a loophole in tax law, Leonard Leo's so-called nonprofit and the Republican billionaire avoided paying as much as $400 million in taxes on that transaction. Yesterday, Senator Whitehouse introduced the End Tax Breaks for Dark Money Act to close the loophole in the tax code that allows billionaires to avoid paying taxes on assets of donations to dark money organizations. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he's chair of the Subcommittee on Federal Courts. He's also the author of The Scheme, How the Right Wing Used Dark Money to Capture the Supreme Court. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. The notion that a Supreme Court justice could violate the very simplest of tax law. Tax law doesn't get much simpler than what he seems to have violated. Is something that was really unimaginable prior to the last, year or so that we started discovering just how wide open this kind of nuttiness has become at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying so hard to get the Judicial Conference, which is made up of judges who actually are bound by the ethics laws and who enforce the ethics laws so they understand how the ethics laws work, to get more serious about figuring out how you can oversee the Supreme Court. At the moment, they just passed their new code of ethics for themselves, which is like saying we adopt the rules of baseball, except for that part about umpires. We're going to call our own balls and strikes, and we're going to call ourselves safe on base. This whole umpire stuff, that's for other people, not for us. That's just a crazy way to look at it. And what I was pointing out in that speech is that when these justices violate their own ethics laws, there are very often other legal consequences. They may have made a criminal false statement under the criminal code, 18 United States Code, Section 1001. They may very well have violated tax laws if they failed to report a gift to them as income, or the donor might have failed to report the gift under gift tax rules, and they might be in violation of gift tax laws. So all of this potential law breaking is a very embarrassing thing for the court system as a whole to say, well, we're just not going to take a look into that. So I wanted to raise the stakes a little bit for the Judicial Conference to show how much there is to look at once you peel back the skin of what's going on at the Supreme Court.
And most of the work of the Supreme Court, as we know, is low visibility. There aren't headlines about it. There are countless tax cases that move through the Supreme Court in a given year. Clarence Thomas ruling on every single one of them. Those cases involve questions of compliance, and the notion that you have a non-tax law compliant justice ruling on such cases is just stunning.
If anybody else had come before the United States Supreme Court with the argument that they didn't understand that when they stopped paying the interest on a loan whose principal they had never repaid, and that was not a discharge of that indebtedness and therefore not income, they'd have been laughed out of the courtroom by these very justices. But when they're the ones who are involved in it, then suddenly it all gets very peculiar. So the Judicial Conference, I think, really has an important role here, and also getting to the bottom of these donations by the billionaires, and why on earth a billionaire spending money to influence either the court or political elections should be able to use pre-tax money to exert their influence when every ordinary person who writes a $100 check to a friend who's running for city council or for Congress pays with after-tax money. That's a completely unfair advantage for the billionaires, who shouldn't be allowed to spend that much money in the first place, let alone have a tax advantage.
And the only way your bill is going to get through will be in a tax bill that's moving through on reconciliation rules that needs 51 votes, which is one of the reasons why you got to have 51 Democratic votes in that Senate to do things like this, because pretty much every Republican would vote against it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the same billionaires who got these justices onto the court are also the major funders of the Republican Party, and they pull both sets of strings. And the result is that Republicans will not look at the problems of the court to save their lives.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you so much for staying on this case and for keeping that flashlight of yours looking around that room for us and revealing something else every time we go to it. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Lawrence.
We'll be right back.